If four dealerships tell you the exact same story, maybe the problem isn't your car. Maybe it's the people standing around it. Victoria Sterling folded her sunglasses and slipped them into the pocket of her charcoal blazer as she stepped into the fourth dealership that week. The polished showroom gleamed beneath bright LED lights, reflecting rows of luxury SUVs lined up with military precision. Fresh coffee drifted through the waiting lounge, while soft jazz floated from hidden speakers. Every detail whispered trust, professionalism, and success. Yet every visit had left the same bitter taste. Her midnight blue Sterling S8 sat in the service bay with its hood raised, surrounded by technicians who barely looked at the engine before reaching for expensive conclusions. "I'm afraid the entire electronic control system has failed," the service manager said with rehearsed sympathy. "You'll need a complete replacement. Parts, labor, programming. You're looking at around $82,000. Victoria nodded politely, her expression unreadable beneath the disguise of an ordinary customer. Different city, different dealership, different employees. The exact same diagnosis, the exact same estimate, the exact same carefully memorized explanation. She thanked the manager, accepted the printed quote, and quietly walked outside. A cool October breeze carried the scent of fallen maple leaves across the parking lot. Customers wandered between shiny vehicles while salespeople greeted them with polished smiles. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt wrong. Across the street, tucked between an aging diner and a family-owned hardware store, sat a weathered garage with a faded wooden sign that simply read Brooks Auto Service. No giant banners, no glass showroom, no expensive landscaping, just a single service bay with its door half open and the steady rhythm of metal tools echoing from inside. Victoria glanced at the building almost by accident. An old golden retriever slept peacefully beside the entrance. Wind chimes swayed gently above the office door. The place looked forgotten by time. Inside, Ethan Brooks tightened the final bolt on a pickup truck before wiping his hands with a worn shop towel. At 39, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer cared whether the world noticed him. Grease stained his work shirt, and a faded photograph of his 12-year-old daughter Lily rested beside the register. Every afternoon after school, she stopped by the garage, finished her homework at the small desk in the corner, and waited for her father to close up. It wasn't the life Ethan had imagined years ago, but it was the one he treasured. The bell above the office door chimed softly. Victoria stepped inside, carrying nothing except the thick envelope containing 4 identical repair estimates. Ethan looked up with an easy smile. "Afternoon. What seems to be giving you trouble?" Victoria studied him for a moment. No polished sales pitch. No forced enthusiasm. No designer uniform embroidered with corporate logos. Just calm eyes that seemed more interested in listening than selling. "I've already had 4 professional opinions," she replied evenly. They all agreed. Ethan nodded once. "That happens." She placed the estimates on the counter. "Would you like to see them?" He didn't even glance at the papers. Instead, he walked outside, lifted the hood of the Sterling S8, and quietly observed the engine without touching a single component. 40 seconds passed. No escáner, no flashlight, no dramatic performance. Just silence broken only by the ticking of warm metal cooling beneath the autumn air. Then Ethan gently lowered the hood, turned toward Victoria, and offered the smallest hint of a smile. "Your car isn't broken," he said softly. "Your trust is." Victoria did not answer immediately. She had spent years building one of the largest automotive companies in America, and experience had taught her that the loudest experts were often the least trustworthy. Yet the man standing in front of her had reached a conclusion without touching a single tool, and somehow she found herself wanting to hear more. "Would you mind explaining that?" she asked calmly. Ethan leaned against the workbench, his voice steady and unhurried. "I could, but first I need to know something. Has anyone actually shown you the failed component, Victoria Post?" Every dealership had shown her colorful diagnostic screens, impressive charts, and long lists of technical codes, but not one technician had ever physically pointed to the part they claimed had failed. "No," she admitted. Ethan nodded, as though the answer confirmed something he had already suspected. Interesting. He reached for a clean shop towel and carefully wiped his hands before opening the hood again. His movements were slow and deliberate, almost respectful. There was no rush, no attempt to impress, only quiet confidence shaped by years of routine. Sunlight filtered through the garage door, catching tiny dust particles that floated lazily through the air while the distant sound of a freight train echoed across town. Most people trust whatever appears on a computer screen, Ethan said. Computers are useful. They are not magical. They only report what they are told. Victoria watched him closely. And what is this one telling you? Ethan smiled faintly. It is telling 4 dealerships exactly what they wanted to hear. Before she could ask another question, the front door opened again. A cheerful 12-year-old girl stepped inside, carrying a backpack nearly as large as herself. Dot. Ethan looked up, and the serious expression on his face softened instantly. Hey, Lily. How was school? Pretty good. I got an A on my science quiz. That deserves ice cream tonight. Lily laughed before noticing Victoria standing nearby. I did not mean to interrupt. You are fine, Victoria replied warmly. Congratulations on your quiz. Thank you, ma'am. Lily disappeared into the tiny office, pulled out her homework, and quietly began writing at the old wooden desk. Victoria glanced toward the room. Family photographs lined the shelves. There were birthday pictures, camping trips, homemade holiday decorations, and one older photograph turned slightly away from the others. Nothing about the place looked expensive, yet everything felt cared for. Ethan noticed her eyes lingering on the pictures. It has been just the 2 of us for a long time, he said simply. There was no sadness in his voice, only acceptance. Victoria nodded without pressing further. She understood private grief better than most people realized. Success had given her wealth, influence, and recognition, but had also taught her how loneliness could hide behind polished smiles and expensive suits. Ethan reached beneath the dashboard and listened carefully as he turned the ignition halfway forward. A faint clicking sound lasted barely 2 seconds before disappearing. He switched everything off again. There it is, he whispered. Victoria Froneth. You heard something? I heard exactly what I expected to hear. He straightened and looked directly at her. If I am right, your repair is going to cost less than $200. For the first time all week, Victoria felt something she had not expected to feel when she walked into another repair shop. Hope. Victoria looked at Ethan for several quiet seconds before speaking again. Less than $200? She repeated carefully. That is your estimate? Ethan shook his head. No, that is my guess until I confirm it. Estimates should come after evidence. The answer caught her off guard. Every dealership had rushed to print invoices before asking meaningful questions. This man seemed more interested in proving himself wrong than proving himself right. Ethan reached into an old metal cabinet and removed a compact diagnostic meter that had clearly seen years of use. The faded scratches along its casing spoke of thousands of careful repairs rather than expensive upgrades. He connected a single lead beneath the dashboard while the other remained clipped to a grounding point near the battery. The small display flickered quietly. No alarms, no dramatic warnings, just numbers changing patiently. Lily glanced up from her homework. The sensor again? Ethan smiled without taking his eyes off the display. Maybe. What makes you think that? Because you make the same face every time a sensor is pretending to be something bigger. Victoria could not help smiling. She knows your work well. Ethan chuckled softly. She has spent enough afternoons in this garage to earn honorary mechanic status. Lily grinned proudly before returning to her math assignment. Outside, clouds drifted slowly across the autumn sky, softening the afternoon sunlight that spilled through the open garage door. Leaves rolled across the cracked pavement in small circles whenever the breeze wandered through the parking lot. Everything about the little garage felt calm, almost untouched by the pressure of the modern world. Ethan disconnected the meter and reached toward a wiring harness hidden beneath a protective cover. He gently moved one connector no larger than the width of 2 fingers. Instantly, the faint clicking sound disappeared. He looked back toward Victoria. Would you start the engine now? She stepped into the driver's seat and pressed the ignition button. The engine started immediately, settling into a smooth, even idle that sounded noticeably different from before. No warning lights appeared. No hositashchen. No unusual vibration. She pressed the accelerator lightly. The response was immediate. Ethan listened for another few moments before nodding once. Exactly what I expected. Victoria stepped out slowly. What did you do? No sin permano. You fixed it without replacing anything? Not yet. Ethan closed the hood gently. I only confirmed where the problem lives. There is a connector losing communication because of a defective internal contact. Replacing the entire control system would solve it, but so would replacing one small component. Victoria folded her arms thoughtfully. Then why would certified dealerships recommend replacing everything? Ethan remained silent for a moment. He looked across the street toward the polished dealership building where colorful banners fluttered proudly in the afternoon breeze. Sometimes people stop solving problems, he said quietly. They start selling expensive answers instead. The words hung in the cool air. There was no anger behind them. No accusation. Only disappointment. Victoria opened the thick envelope once more and spread the 4 repair estimates across the workbench. For different company logos. For different signatures. For identical recommendations down to nearly the exact dollar. Ethan studied the pages without touching them. Then his eyes stopped on one small line printed near the bottom of each estimate. A nearly invisible software reference code. His calm expression changed almost imperceptibly. He looked back at Victoria and spoke with quiet certainty. These were not written independently. Someone taught all 4 dealerships to tell the same story. Victoria kept her expression carefully neutral, but her pulse had quickened. She had built her company on one belief above all others. Trust was earned one customer at a time. If Ethan was correct, then someone had quietly replaced that trust with a carefully engineered script. She gathered the 4 estimates into a neat stack and slipped them back into the envelope. Suppose you were right, she said evenly. How would you prove it? Ethan walked toward an old filing cabinet beside the workbench and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside were dozens of worn repair manuals, notebooks filled with handwritten observations, and folders labeled by vehicle models rather than years. He selected one thick binder, opened it to a page covered with neat notes, and laid it on the counter. Patterns leave fingerprints, he said. Not real fingerprints. Habits. Victoria leaned closer. Every page contained dates, customer complaints, repair outcomes, and tiny observations that most people would never think to record. Ethan had documented recurring issues, software updates, environmental conditions, and even regional weather patterns that occasionally affected electrical systems. It looked less like a garage notebook and more like the journal of a careful scientist. You wrote all of this? She asked. Over about 15 years. Why? Ethan shrugged gently. Machines remember everything. People forget. Lily smiled from across the office. Dad says the car is never the first thing that lies. Ethan laughed quietly. I might have said that once or twice. Victoria turned another page. Certain repair codes had been circled several times over recent months. Next to them, Ethan had written short observations in blue ink. Same recommendation. Different vehicle. No physical failure found. Verify before replacing. She looked up. You have seen this before. Not this often. Ethan replied. The strange part is the timing. He pointed toward the software reference code printed near the bottom of one estimate. This update was released less than 3 months ago. Before that, these repairs were almost never recommended. Now suddenly everyone is replacing the same expensive assembly. Victoria felt the pieces beginning to shift into place. For dealerships, for cities, one software reference, one identical solution. It was too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. Outside, the afternoon light had begun turning golden. A customer stopped to pet the old golden retriever before driving away with a friendly wave. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang softly across the town, blending with the distant hum of passing traffic. The little garage remained peaceful while an uncomfortable truth quietly took shape inside it. Victoria reached into her handbag and removed a simple business card without her company title. It carried only her first name and a private phone number. She slid across the counter. "If I wanted to investigate this further, would you help me?" Ethan glanced at the card, but did not pick it up immediately. "Only if the goal is to help the people who paid for repairs they never needed." "Not for money?" she asked. "Money fixes bills," Ethan answered calmly. "Truth fixes systems." The words settled over the room like the final note of a familiar song. Victoria realized she had spent years surrounded by executives who measured every decision by quarterly profits. This mechanic measured success differently. Before she could respond, her phone vibrated quietly inside her purse. She glanced at the screen. The message came from the head of internal compliance at Sterling Automotive. The investigation she had secretly ordered that morning had produced its first result. The subject line contained only 6 words. "Preliminary findings require immediate executive review." Victoria slipped her phone back into her purse before the screen could light up again. Years of leading board meetings had taught her one valuable habit: never react before you understand the full picture. She looked across the garage at Ethan, who had already returned too, cleaning his tools as though their conversation had been nothing extraordinary. There was no curiosity about her identity, no attempt to impress her, and no interest in asking why a woman carrying 4 identical repair estimates had appeared out of nowhere. He simply continued his work. That quiet discipline fascinated her. "I should probably get going," she said. Ethan nodded. "Whenever you are ready." "You are not going to ask who I am." He smiled faintly. "You will tell me when it matters. Until then, you are just someone trying not to be taken advantage of." The answer lingered with her long after she climbed back into the Sterling S8. As she drove away, she glanced once in the rearview mirror. Ethan was helping an elderly customer load groceries into the trunk of a weathered sedan while Lily waved goodbye from the office window. The little garage quickly disappeared behind a line of maple trees, but the calm certainty in Ethan's voice refused to leave her thoughts. Less than an hour later, Victoria entered the executive headquarters of Sterling Automotive through a private entrance known only to senior leadership. Glass walls reflected the fading afternoon sunlight, while employees hurried through wide corridors carrying tablets and folders. Everyone greeted her with practiced professionalism, unaware that she had spent the day dressed as an ordinary customer. Inside the executive conference room, the head of internal compliance, Daniel Mercer, was already waiting beside a large digital display. His usually composed expression had been replaced by quiet concern. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said. Victoria placed the envelope containing the 4 repair estimates on the conference table. "Tell me what you found." Daniel pressed a button, and several charts appeared on the screen. 3 months ago, warranty replacement claims for one specific electronic control assembly increased by 387% across 4 independently owned dealerships. Victoria remained silent. Daniel continued. "At first we believed it was a manufacturing defect. Our engineering department tested return components. 94% were fully functional." Victoria slowly folded her hands. "What explanation did the dealerships provide?" Daniel hesitated. They all submitted nearly identical technical reports using the same software diagnostic reference. Victoria reached into the envelope and removed one estimate. She placed it beside the report displayed on the screen. The software reference matched perfectly. Daniel looked up, surprised. "Where did you get that?" "From one of the dealerships." She laid down the second estimate, then the third, then the fourth. For cities, for different service managers, for identical reference codes. Silence settled over the room. The quiet hum of the air conditioning suddenly seemed louder than anyone's breathing. Daniel slowly adjusted his glasses. "This cannot be a coincidence." Victoria remembered Ethan's words. "Patterns leave fingerprints. Machines remember everything. People forget." She looked through the glass wall, overlooking hundreds of employees working below. Somewhere inside her own company, trust had quietly become a business model instead of a promise. "Begin a full forensic audit," she said calmly. "Every repair order, every warranty claim, Every software update connected to those 4 dealerships. Daniel nodded immediately. Should we notify legal? Victoria thought for a brief moment before answering. Not yet. Why not? She closed the folder gently. Because there is someone outside this building who already understands the problem better than we do. And before anyone knows this investigation has begun, I intend to hear everything he has to say. The investigation remained invisible for exactly 3 days. That was all the time it took before someone realized uncomfortable questions were being asked. Ethan noticed a change before anyone said a word. Monday mornings were usually busy at Brooks Auto Service. Parents dropped off family SUVs before work, retirees stopped in for routine maintenance, and delivery drivers waved as they passed the open garage door. This Monday felt different. The parking lot stayed unusually quiet. The phone that normally rang every half hour remained silent through most of the morning. Lily looked up from organizing invoices. Dad, did everyone suddenly decide their cars are working perfectly? Ethan smiled gently. Cars always need something eventually. But deep down he knew silence often arrived before trouble did. Shortly before noon, the first customer finally pulled into the driveway. A middle-aged man stepped out of his pickup looking embarrassed. Ethan, I wanted you to know something. Sure, I was going to bring my truck here like always, but another shop called me yesterday. Ethan listened quietly. They offered a free inspection and 20% off every future repair if I switched. Did you? The man hesitated before nodding. I did. It just seemed like a good deal. Ethan extended his hand with a warm smile. No hard feelings. Take care of your truck. The customer looked almost relieved by the kindness. You're a better man than most people I know. After he drove away, Ethan simply returned to replacing brake pads on an old family sedan. He never complained, never blamed anyone. By Wednesday, 3 more longtime customers had quietly disappeared. Thursday morning brought anonymous online reviews criticizing work that Ethan had never performed. Friday afternoon, a parts supplier called to explain that a large corporate account had suddenly purchased nearly every electronic component Ethan regularly ordered, delaying future deliveries indefinitely. None of the events seemed connected by themselves. Together, they formed a pattern. Lily watched her father balancing invoices at the small office desk long after sunset. The numbers no longer lined up the way they usually did. She walked over carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. Are we going to be okay? Ethan accepted the mug with a grateful smile. We always find a way. Are you worried? He looked through the front window where the old golden retriever slept peacefully beneath the porch light. Worry never repaired an engine. Lily laughed softly. That sounds like another one of your garage sayings. Maybe it is. Across the state, inside a private conference room overlooking the city skyline, Victoria listened as Daniel Mercer reviewed another stack of findings. The audit expanded this. Morning, he reported. We now have evidence that service advisors were encouraged to recommend complete electronic replacements whenever that diagnostic code appeared, even if further testing was never performed. Victoria remained silent. There is something else, Daniel continued carefully. Within the last 48 hours, someone has been monitoring independent repair shops that questioned those recommendations. Victoria slowly lifted her eyes. Monitoring how? Daniel handed her a report. Customer redirection campaigns, coordinated discount offers, supplier pressure, negative review activity. The pattern began immediately after one independent mechanic challenged the diagnosis. Victoria already knew the name before Daniel spoke it. Ethan Brooks. Daniel nodded. Someone wants his business to disappear quietly. The room fell still. Victoria remembered the peaceful garage, the old dog sleeping by the entrance, Lily doing homework at the wooden desk, and the mechanic who cared more about protecting strangers than making money. She closed the report with deliberate calm. Arrange my schedule for tomorrow morning. Daniel looked up. Board meeting? Victoria stood and reached for her coat. No. A quiet determination settled across her face. It is time they learn exactly who walked into that little garage. And it is time Ethan Brooks learns who walked in with 4 repair estimates. Saturday morning arrived with crisp blue skies and the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the diner across the street. Brooks Auto Service opened at 8 o'clock, just as it had every weekend for years. Ethan unlocked the front door, swept a few scattered leaves from the entrance, and filled the old dog's water bowl before raising the garage door. Lily arranged fresh pastries on the office counter, smiling as the first rays of sunlight reached the family photographs along the wall. It looked like an ordinary morning until a line of black luxury vehicles rolled slowly onto the quiet street. One after another, they stopped in front of the modest garage, their polished paint reflecting the small storefronts around them. Neighbors paused on the sidewalk. Customers inside the diner turned toward the windows. Even the old golden retriever lifted his head with curious eyes. Ethan looked up from the engine he was inspecting, but remained perfectly calm. The rear door of the first sedan opened, and Victoria stepped out wearing a tailored navy business suit instead of the casual clothes she had worn days earlier. Behind her came Daniel Mercer, two senior executives, and several members of the corporate legal department carrying briefcases. No one spoke for several long seconds. The only sound was the gentle rustling of maple leaves overhead. Victoria walked toward Ethan with measured steps until she stood beside the same workbench where they had first met. She extended her hand. "Good morning, Ethan." He wiped his hands on a clean towel before shaking it. "Good morning, Victoria." She smiled softly. "I owe you an apology." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "For what?" "For not telling you who I really was." Lily quietly stepped out of the office, sensing something important was happening. A few local residents had gathered near the sidewalk, pretending to admire nearby storefronts while watching the unusual scene unfold. Victoria took a slow breath. "My full name is Victoria Sterling." Ethan waited patiently. "I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Automotive." Silence settled over the little garage. Daniel watched Ethan carefully, expecting surprise, perhaps even disbelief. Instead, Ethan simply nodded once. "Thank you for telling me." Daniel blinked. One of the attorneys exchanged puzzled glances with another executive. Victoria herself looked almost amused. "That is all you're going to say?" Ethan smiled gently. "You are still the woman who wanted an honest answer about her car." For the first time in days, Victoria laughed openly. The sound felt genuine, free from boardrooms, investor calls, and carefully rehearsed presentations. "Most people react very differently when they learn who I am. Most people probably want something from you," Ethan replied. "I already have what matters most." His eyes drifted toward Lily, who smiled back without saying a word. Victoria followed his gaze and understood immediately. Wealth could purchase almost anything except moments like that. Daniel stepped forward and handed Victoria a thick folder embossed with the Sterling Automotive logo. She accepted it, then placed it gently on Ethan's workbench. "Our internal investigation confirmed nearly everything you suspected," she said. 4 dealerships followed the same fraudulent repair pattern. Thousands of customers may have paid for replacements they never needed. Ethan looked at the folder but did not open it. "I'm sorry to hear that." Victoria studied him for a moment. There was no satisfaction in his face, no pride in being proven right. Only quiet disappointment that so many people had lost trust. She took one more step closer and spoke softly enough that only those nearest could hear. "Ethan, I did not come here only to thank you. I came because my company needs someone who still believes honesty is worth protecting, and I believe that person is standing in front of me." On Monday morning, Ethan accepted Victoria's invitation with one condition. "I will answer every question your engineers have," he said. "But I will not embarrass anyone. We are here to solve a problem, not to humiliate people." Victoria nodded immediately. "That is exactly why I asked you." By noon, Ethan walked through the glass entrance of Sterling Automotive headquarters wearing the same clean work shirt he had worn in his garage. Employees glanced at him with quiet curiosity as he crossed the marble lobby beside Victoria. Some assumed he was a consultant. Others guessed he was a technician. No one imagined the man, carrying a weathered notebook, was about to reshape the way the company looked at its own repairs. The executive engineering conference room overlooked the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Around the long table sat senior engineers, software specialists, warranty directors, compliance officers, and regional service managers. Laptops glowed beneath soft lighting, while technical diagrams filled two enormous display screens. The atmosphere was polite but cautious. Victoria stood at the head of the table. "Before we begin," she said calmly, "I want everyone to understand that today is not about assigning blame. It is about finding truth." She turned toward Ethan. "The floor is yours." Ethan remained standing instead of taking the empty executive chair prepared for him. He placed his old notebook on the table and looked around the room. "I appreciate your time," he began quietly. "I'm not here because I know more than anyone in this room. I am here because I kept asking one simple question." He picked up one of the dealership repair reports. "Where's the failed part?" The room remained silent. Ethan continued. "Every recommendation in these reports replaces an entire electronic assembly. Yet almost none of the reports identify which physical component actually failed. They identify software symptoms, not mechanical evidence." One senior engineer leaned forward. "Software diagnostics are industry standard." Ethan smiled respectfully. "Absolutely. But software points us toward a problem. It does not replace the responsibility to verify it." He connected a small training module to the display system and recreated the exact diagnostic code that had appeared on hundreds of repair orders. The warning message instantly appeared on the screen. Several managers nodded, recognizing it immediately. Ethan reached beneath the demonstration unit and unplugged a tiny connector worth less than $200. The same warning remained visible. Then he reconnected the inexpensive part, restarted the system, and every warning disappeared. No expensive assembly had been replaced. No major repair had been required. The conference room grew unusually quiet. One software specialist slowly adjusted his glasses before checking the engineering documentation on his laptop. Another engineer searched archived service bulletins. A warranty director compared repair histories across multiple regions. No one argued. No one interrupted. They simply verified what they had just witnessed. After several long minutes, the senior chief engineer finally looked up. "He is correct." Another engineer nodded. "The software was never wrong. We stopped performing the final physical inspection." Ethan closed his notebook gently. Technology should help people think. It should never replace thinking. Victoria looked around the room. The confidence that had filled it an hour earlier had been replaced by thoughtful silence. No one had been insulted. No one had been attacked. Yet the truth had spoken more clearly than any accusation ever could. Daniel Mercer quietly placed a summary report beside Victoria. "The audit team has completed its findings," he whispered. "The 4 dealerships have admitted they encouraged complete replacements without mandatory verification. Corrective actions are ready for your approval." Victoria looked from the report to Ethan. The mechanic had not raised his voice once. He had not tried to impress anyone. He had simply reminded an entire company that integrity often begins with one person willing to ask the question everyone else stopped asking. By the end of the week, Sterling Automotive announced the largest customer care initiative in the company's history. Every repair connected to the investigation would be reviewed. Customers who had paid for unnecessary replacements would receive full reimbursements. New inspection standards would require technicians to verify every major diagnosis with physical evidence before recommending expensive repairs. Across the country, thousands of families received unexpected phone calls that began with the same simple words: "We owe you an apology." The response surprised even Victoria. Most customers were not angry. They were grateful that someone had finally chosen honesty over convenience. Inside her office overlooking the city, she signed a final authorization for the corrective program before asking Daniel Mercer to invite Ethan upstairs one last time. He entered quietly, carrying the same worn notebook that had started everything. Victoria stood and walked toward him instead of remaining behind her desk. "I have one more proposal," she said. Ethan smiled politely. "I was expecting that." She laughed softly. "You really do notice everything." She handed him a sealed envelope. Inside was an executive employment offer unlike anything Sterling Automotive had ever extended outside the company. The position would oversee technical integrity across every dealership in the nation. The salary was generous. The benefits were extraordinary. Complete freedom to redesign inspection procedures had been included in the agreement. Ethan read every page without speaking. When he finally looked up, Victoria searched his face for an answer. "It is a remarkable offer," he said sincerely. "Then I hope you will accept it." Ethan carefully folded the documents and returned them to the envelope. "I cannot." Daniel looked genuinely surprised. "May I ask why?" Ethan glanced through the office window toward the streets below, where thousands of people hurried through another ordinary afternoon. "Every morning my daughter walks into my garage before school, because she knows exactly where to find me. Every afternoon, someone with an old truck or a family car pulls into that parking lot hoping they will meet someone who tells them the truth. I cannot give that up." Victoria nodded slowly. She understood better than anyone expected. "Then tell me what you will accept." Ethan thought for only a moment. "Train new technicians. Teach them to ask better questions. Help young mechanics understand that integrity is part of every repair. And keep your promise to every customer who trusted your name." The room became very still. Daniel quietly closed his notebook. Even the city beyond the glass seemed distant for a moment. Victoria extended her hand once more. "Done." Ethan shook it with the same calm respect as the first day they met. Weeks later, Brooks Auto Service looked exactly as it always had. The old golden retriever still greeted visitors from his favorite place beside the entrance. Lily still finished her homework at the wooden desk after school. The faded sign above the garage door had not changed, but something else had. Customers now drove for hours to reach the little garage they had seen mentioned in local news stories about honesty and accountability. Ethan greeted every one of them exactly the same way he always had. No speeches, no celebration, just a quiet smile and an honest question about what their vehicle was doing. One cool autumn evening, a familiar midnight blue Sterling S8 rolled gently into the driveway. Victoria stepped out carrying nothing, except 2 cups of coffee from the diner across the street. She handed one to Ethan as they stood beside the old workbench watching the last golden light settle over the town. "You were right," she said quietly. "The car was never the biggest problem." Ethan looked toward the families walking home beneath the maple trees before answering. The good thing about trust is that when people choose to earn it back, it can become even stronger than before. Victoria smiled, knowing she had spent years searching for extraordinary talent in impressive places only to discover that the rarest kind of greatness had been quietly waiting inside a small neighborhood garage where a single father had never stopped choosing dignity over profit.